Hello guys, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to learn the first chapter of physiology, that is principles of homeostasis. First of all, let us check what is the definition of homeostasis. Homeostasis is nothing but maintenance of constancy of the internal environment of body, that is also called as extracellular fluid. This term milieu interior was coined by Claude Bernard. He was a physiologist, French physiologist. Okay, now let us see what is internal environment of body. Internal environment of body is nothing but the extracellular fluid, the fluid present between the cells. And the homeostasis is nothing but the maintenance of constancy of the fluid between these cells. Okay, what were the observations made by Claude Bernard? He observed that the volume and composition is constant and independent of the changes in the environment where it lives, that is the exterior environment. That might be the temperature outside or the heat, etc, etc. Okay, next coming down to the extracellular fluid, that is the internal environment of our body. About 60% of total body is water, out of which 2/3 is inside the cell, 1/3 is outside the cell. Okay, and the electrolyte composition of ECF roughly resembles seawater. As you all know, seawater is rich in salt, that is Na and Cl. So the extracellular fluid is also rich in sodium, chloride, and poor in potassium. Whereas the intracellular fluid is rich in potassium. Okay, and later Walter Cannon gave the name homeostasis. Chalo, let us see how does our body have a mechanism. What all mechanisms does it have to control the homeostasis in our body? So what is the importance of mechanism of homeostatic mechanisms? That are, it maintains stability of the internal environment. It not only maintains the equilibrium but also balance composition of the extracellular fluid. And homeostasis is minimum requirement for smooth functioning of body, because if there is a disturbance in the ECF, then it will directly affect the functions happening in the intracellular fluid or in the cell. Okay, next coming to the feedback mechanisms of homeostatic regulations. Homeostasis is mainly achieved through feedback mechanisms. Okay, and there are two types. There are negative feedback mechanism and positive feedback mechanism, and they operate to safeguard a set point already set for a physiological variable. So they operate to safeguard a set point, means already there is a limit in our body. Okay, it operates to safeguard that limit in our body. Next, coming to the positive feedback mechanism. In positive feedback mechanism, what do you mean by feedback? Feedback is nothing but if you give a response and the response to that is known as feedback. Okay, for example, if you go to a mall or a clothing shop, you receive a service, right? And depending on that service, you give the feedback to the company about the service which you received. Similarly, this is for positive feedback. In this case, if there is an increase in variable, this mechanism further increases it rather than decreasing it. So this control mechanism does not operate to provide homeostasis, because if we have a set point, assume as x. Okay, this is a x assume set point for a certain physiological variable. Okay, then if it becomes x plus 1, the mechanisms operated to become x plus 2 rather than making it back to x. So this doesn't operate to provide mechanism, that homeostasis. And the PFM, that is positive feedback mechanism, is a vicious cycle. It terminates only when the stimulus applied to trigger is withdrawn or it is self-terminated. And it is also useful in some of the mechanisms like the parturition reflex, which we have studied in the earlier year, that is oxytocin, in which the oxytocin and uterine muscles, uterine contraction. Okay, when oxytocin acts on uterine muscles, which makes it to contract, which further stimulates the release of oxytocin, which further contracts it. Okay, then the nerve impulse transmission and enzyme cascade hypothesis of blood coagulation, LH surge, and activation of digestive enzymes. Okay, these were the examples of positive feedback mechanism. Next, coming down to the negative feedback mechanism, it is a usual mechanism of homeostatic regulation. So, if a variable is increased, it brings it down to the variable, that is a set point. And some physiological variables requires more than one mechanism. For example, the control of arterial pressure involves pressure monitoring system, volume monitoring system, hormonal mechanisms, reflex regulation, autonomic control. So, to maintain this one physiological variable, you require 5 mechanisms. Okay, and what does the negative feedback mechanism consist of? It consists of a sensor, control center, and effector. So, what is a sensor? Sensor is nothing but that detects a change in variable, and control center receives input and initiates command signal. Okay, effector that responds according to the command signal. For example, a sensor, it contains receptors. For example, baroreceptors in the carotid sinus and aortica. Carotid sinus is present in our neck. This is the neck part, and here the carotid sinus is present, and the baroreceptors are present along this carotid sinus and aortic arc. So they detect change in the pressure in the lumen. Okay, if the pressure is high, it triggers it sends a signal to the command. Okay, send signals to medullary cardiovascular centers. This control center is located in CNS, especially in brain, and that is centers for blood pressure are located in the medulla and hypothalamus. Okay, then effector is the target organ. Okay, for example, blood vessels, heart are the effector organs for BP regulation, which we have learned in this example. So let us understand it once again. So a sensor senses the change. Okay, it senses change and sends signals to the control center. The control center initiates the mechanism and affects the effector muscles. Okay, next, the reverse process is initiated when the variable is reduced. Reverse process is initiated when the variable is reduced below set point. This is why the negative feedback mechanism is a usual mechanism for maintaining our physiology, is homeostasis. Because if the variable increases, for example, a set point is x, and if it become x plus 1, it reduces back to s, and if it decreases x minus 1, then it makes it x. So this is the usual mechanism of homeostatic regulation. Understood? Okay, then coming down to this point, that kidney plays a vital role because it maintains many physiological variables, that is regulation of blood volume and blood pressure, pH balance, electrolyte composition of fluid, osmolality of the fluid. Understood? Kidney plays a very vital role because it has many physiological variables which it maintains the homeostasis. And then examples of homeostatic regulation. The examples of homeostatic regulation are body temperature regulation. So you all know that normal temp of body is 96 degree Fahrenheit to 98.4 degree Fahrenheit. So when temperature increases, body activates mechanisms controlling heat loss through cutaneous vasodilation and sweating. So when temperature increases, vasodilation occurs. That is the um, widening of blood vessels. Okay, So widening of blood vessels, what does it do? It dissipates the heat faster. Okay, and the sweating cools down the body. Okay, in case of hypothermia, that is the less temperature, body responds by decreasing heat loss by vasoconstriction. So in this case, the vessels contract, making it difficult for the heat to dissipate and increase heat production through shivering. Okay, and another example is BP regulation, that is systolic is 100 and diastolic is 60. Okay, then again another example is regulation of hormone secretion, regulated mainly by negative feedback mechanisms. Hormone concentration increases, their production and decreases, and vice versa. So next, coming down to the intracellular homeostasis. Traditionally, homeostasis refers to the stability of ECF, and the primary objective of homeostasis is to maintain intracellular homeostasis. So the homeostasis of ECF is greatly affected by the intracellular activities, because ECF depends on the intracellular fluid, and homeostasis of ECF is largely affected by ECF, and homeostasis is mainly achieved by coordination of balance between ECF and ICF. So for the homeostasis of our entire body, both the homeostasis of ECF and ICF are essential. So homeostasis of ECF is dependent. Both rather you can say that both are both are interdependent on each other. Okay, that's it for today. We'll in the next class we'll learn about the second chapter, that is cellular organization and intercellular connection. Thank you.